In this lesson, we will use our birth and hit attributes to copy our explosion and launch smoke pyro simulations onto the particle simulations at the correct time. So let's go ahead and start off by dropping down a new geometry SOP. We're going to start with the launch smoke. So we'll do launch smoke anim. And let's dive inside, kill the file SOP, and put down 2 object merges. One for our pop simulation to get the pops points, and one for the launch smoke. Into this object, find the launch smoke. Where is it? There it is, launch smoke out. Accept. Just rename these so I know what they're actually bringing in. Launch smoke and pops points. Let's go ahead and put down our copy SOP and see what we get right off the bat. Plug that in here, plug this in here. Let me go up here and turn off the rocket anim so we don't see that in the visualization. And you'll see that our launch smoke is copying onto our points, but they're copying along with the rocket, and they're all birthing at the same time and dying immediately. So we need to fix those two things. First off, we need to get the smoke to stay inside the tube, and secondly, we need the smoke to burst specifically right when the rocket first launches. So if you remember, we made those 2 attributes. We made birth pause and birth frame, and we're going to use those to add that functionality. But before we can use those, we need to map them. So I'm going to put down attribute create and map those. We'll do AC map birth pause. Tell it to get the attribute birth pause. We'll map it to birth pause is a point vector, and we do not want to write the value. Just going to copy paste that node and do the same for birth frame. Change the attribute to birth frame, local variable birth frame, and it is an integer. And again, we are not writing the values. So now we have those mappings set up. So to get the points to stay at their birth frame, I'm going to drop down a point SOP and just very simply come up here to position and change this to our birth pause. So birth pause X, I'm going to copy tab, Control V the paste, change that to Y, copy tab, and birth pause Z. And let's call this 2 birth pause. And now when I scrub through, you see that the simulations are birthing inside the tubes now. However, they're still not birthing at the correct time. So to get that to work, let's go to our copy SOP. Go over to stamp inputs, and we'll make a variable. We'll just call it B frame, and we'll tell it to be set to our birth frame. Now over on the primitive side of the copy, let's put down a time shift node so we can access this stamp attribute. And to get these to birth at the right time, we're going to do the current frame minus our stamp for copy 1. We'll get the B frame, which is mapping to the birth frame. And if it can't find it, it defaults to 0, but it should always find it. And just to make sure we don't have something where we have, if it's on frame 150 and the birth frame is 150 and we get 150 minus 150, which would give us 0, which we don't have a 0 frame in our simulation, I'm just going to clamp the first frame off to 1. And now when I play this, you see that the smoke is birthing at the correct time. Now it's a little small, so let's go ahead and just put down a transform and scale this up to 2. So you can see it a little bit better. Now one thing you'll notice is that it's kind of not very directional. It's just poofing out at will. And we want to maybe have something where like the smoke kind of follows the rocket just a little bit, so you get the idea that it's being propelled out of the tube. So there's something we can do to do this. If you remember earlier, we were using velocity to drive the rotation of our smoke. However, the velocity is not going to be completely accurate to how these rockets are exiting the tube, something that's going to be a little bit better for us is if we get a vector of where the rocket first bursts and maybe about 5 frames later, and that will make sure that our smoke is following directly where the rocket is going versus maybe being influenced too much by gravity's force on velocity later in the simulation. So to do that, we're going to want to get a vector between the frame and about 5 frames later to make sure that the smoke is traveling along the right vector. So I'm going to put down a time shift and just set this to $f plus 5. Wire this into our simulation. Make sure we just clamp the last frame there. And I'll drop down another point SOP. We're going to use this point SOP to set the normal so we can do that rotation properly. And we're going to set our normal to be equal to the current position minus the position in 5 frames. Let's do the same here. $tx minus $ty2 and $tz minus $tz2. And you see that our rotation and orientation is updating accordingly. Now to get this to be a little bit more directional, we can just come up here and we set this to a scale of -2. And you see now our smoke is being forced out of the tube in a direction to what the rocket is traveling. So that's how we use the attributes we made to dictate when the simulations should birth on our particle simulation. In the next lesson, we will apply these same techniques to the explosion sim.